Hi guys, today going to be making some swamp bases. And to start with, I'm going to be taking some balsa wood and cutting some planks. And apologies if my voice sounds a bit weird, I'm still recovering from some throat surgery. So just trimming some planks out of a piece of balsa wood. And this will give us a flat platform to mount the model's feet on. And then with some thicker pieces of balsa wood, going to trim them down into kind of rounded pegs, and these will be kind of support stumps. Then just going in with fingers and pulling away parts of the balsa wood planks to make them look worn and dilapidated. Next, to build up the swamp turf, we're going to use a variation on the basing paste. So with the coarser cork granules, and then some of this more kind of fibrous basing flock, we're going to mix up a 1:1 ratio with some PVA and some black gesso. And by using the more fibrous flock instead of the kind of fine cork granules, it's going to make it look just a bit more organic, like there is some plant mass or some growth inside the ground itself. And using slightly less PVA than you normally would, because I want it to still have a bit of a springy consistency, and I don't want it to be completely sodden down. And then smearing it on about half of the base. And this will also form a paste that we can use to push some planks into and make a little walkway. But you might need to add a little bit more PVA here, if it's not quite sticky enough. And we want to make sure it is fairly level, so we have a good platform to stand something on top of. And not using any planks on the other base, just having a good blob of the turf, making sure to expose some of the base underneath, and getting a good bit of height from the turf. Then, to make sure we have a stable platform, and we have somewhere to mount, I'm just going to take a piece of balsa wood and flatten down the top, just so we have some good contact points. And then with a slightly thicker balsa wood, putting one or two of the pegs down on the base, before sealing the piece with another coating of black gesso. Then, once that has dried, moving on to the painting. And going in with a coat of light brown paint and just hitting all the details, as well as giving a base coat to the rest of it. And after the brown is done, you have a very difficult choice of brownish green or green brown. I honestly thought I had two of the same colour. And just going in and dabbing the paint on the flat where the base is still visible through, and on the edges of some of the swamp turf. And then, with a more mid-green, going in and once again dabbing in the kind of deeper areas of the swamp, just giving it a bit of more depth of colour, as well as using it to give a bit of weathering to the planks where there's some algae and mould grown up. And then going to knock that back a bit with a lightly watered down, very kind of dark brown, black wash, and just going in and giving it a bit more depth to the swamp water. And then picking out some of the highlights again with the same light brown we used in the first place, and just giving the edges of the wooden planks and the top of them a quick dry brush. Next, we're going to grab some water effects, so using Vallejo water texture gel for this. But this is entirely optional. If you are happy with them already, then stop here. And just putting the gel over the water to give it a nice glossy finish and a bit of a ripple effect. And this stuff does dry transparent, and it takes maybe 3 or 4 days to go completely clear and see-through, depending on how thick it is. And while that's still wet, just taking some clump foliage, breaking off some very small pieces, and submerging a few bits in the water effect. And then pushing it in gently with the edge of a sculpting tool, just so it's partially submerged. Then, while we're waiting for the water effects to dry, I sculpted up and printed out 2 lizardfolk, and going to quickly paint these up just so we can see what they look like with something on top. And again, with Vallejo surface primer, just going in and giving both the pieces a full coat. And I will be trying some speed paints this time, which I've not really used before. And I want to see how good they work for just a very quick undercoat, just to get the shadowing and the detailing. So hitting the areas I want to undercoat with a very light grey paint, and going in with the brown speed paint, just to give the cloth and these scales a base texture to work with. Then, using that as a base coat, just picking out a few extra bits like the tongue and the metallics, as well as a few details with light brown, such as the hoops on his belt and the haft of his axe. Then, picking out a few of the cloth highlights just on the top of the sleeves and the front of the apron. Using a watered down red-brown paint to add some rust onto the armour, as well as the weapon, and just picking out the highlights with a very light green on the top of the head. Giving him some nice yellow eyes. A few vials of green swamp goo, and I thought I'd give him a nice purple cape to contrast with his brownness, but this looked really bad, and the speed paint purple is not one I'd recommend. So I went over it with slightly streaky dark brown red, and made it look a bit more like a dark tanned leather. Then finally, skirting around the base with a dark brown mixed with a green, just so it looks like he's carrying a bit of the swamp around with him. And here it's very important to discover that you're out of superglue, and resolve to use PVA instead. And we could leave it here, but I'm going to take some foam flock and some PVA and mix it up into a very wet glossy paste, and then apply that just on top of some of the wooden planks, as well as near some of the other foliage, so we have a bit of variation in the colour, which is probably quite a swampy thing. And it's fine if you use a bit too much PVA here, because that will just make it look a bit more glossy at the end, which, given it's in a swamp, is probably fine. And then with a few tiny clumps of static grass, just putting them around the base. Then finally, with a very watered down black dark brown paint, going to just dab it on top of the foliage and knock it back a little bit and tie it in with the rest of the base. And there we have it, 2 lizardfolk with swamp bases. Pretty easy and quick to make. The only kind of complicated thing is the water paste, which you could probably just use regular PVA for, if you don't want to spend on a bottle of it. But anyway, thanks for watching guys, I hope to catch you next time. Hopefully my voice will be back to normal by then.